Vishnu Gurudevo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Cheto Darpanamarjanam Bhavamaha Davagni Nirvapanam Shreya Kairavachandrika Vitaranam Vidyavadhu Jeevanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Pratipadam Purnamrita Swadanam Sarvatmasnapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Yo Brahmanam Vidhati Purvam Yo Vai Vedanscha Prahinoti Tasmai Tagvangha Devamatma Buddhi Prakasham Mumukshurvai Sharanamaham Prapadye. Spiritually inquisitive, deserving souls, let us chant the holy name of God for a few minutes, and thereafter the subject will begin. Bhajo Giridhar Govinda Gopala Gopala सद्गुरु सरकार की जय। Rendering an explanation of the Vedic verse, Tameva vidittvati mrityumeti nanyaha pantha vidyate yanaya. Shvetashvatra Upanishad, 3rd chapter, 8th verse. You have been told so far that every living being is a fraction of God, who is the embodiment of perfect bliss. Thus every living being is automatically proven to be a fraction of bliss. And since every fraction has a natural love for its entirety or source, every one of us naturally loves and desires bliss or happiness. Furthermore, since every living being is eternal and unable to remain inactive for even a fraction of a moment, it is proven that every one of us has been working towards the attainment of happiness since time immemorial. But surprisingly enough, in spite of our continuous search for happiness, we have not been able to taste even a drop of it so far. Inquiring into the reason for this, we went into the Vedas, and they told us that happiness can be attained, but only upon God realization. Thereafter, we made an attempt to know God, but the same scriptures then told us that God cannot be known. Why? Because He is divine, and our senses, mind, and intellect are material. He is the inspirer, the illuminator, the upholder, and the knower of our senses, mind, and intellect. He is omniscient, whereas we are ignorant. Furthermore, He is full of paradoxes, that is, mutual contradictions. For example, He is greater than the greatest, yet smaller than the smallest. He is farther than the farthest, yet nearer than the nearest, and so on. He is so frightening that even Yamaraj, the god of death, is terrified of His wrath. He is self-contented, which means He sees, hears, smells, tastes, touches, thinks, and knows nothing but Himself. Yet, He performs the divine dance, Maharas, with the gopis, the milkmaidens of Braj. For all these reasons, He is beyond the reach of our limited and material senses, mind, and intellect. Finding this out, we became disheartened. But then the Vedas instilled a ray of hope in our heart by telling us that God can be known. How? By attaining God's grace. Next, we were told that God's grace cannot be attained without the fulfillment of a certain condition. This again confused us. If God bestows grace conditionally, then why is He known as being causelessly merciful? It would be more appropriate to call Him a businessman instead. If, on the other hand, He is merciful without a cause, then why have we not yet received His grace? And how is it that innumerable living beings in the past have attained His grace, and thereby attained His divine kingdom for all eternity? These were the questions. To find the answers, we went into the scriptures again, all the scriptures from the Vedas to the Ramayana, as well as other religions such as Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity, etc. We also looked at the sayings of some of the great spiritual masters, and we unanimously discovered the answer to one of our questions. How have innumerable living beings attained God's grace in the past? The answer is through self-surrender to Him. But there still remains one very important question, and that is, if God bestows His grace, upon us only after the fulfillment of a certain condition, which we now know is self-surrender, then why is he called the ocean of causeless mercy? In other words, God will not bestow his grace on us unless we do something for him first. But you may recall that I had advised you to hold off on your judgment until you find out the true meaning of self-surrender, which I will disclose to you today with the help of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. In the very first chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna reaches the battlefield of Kurukshetra and sees the army of the Kauravas. He then declares to Lord Krishna that he will not fight against his own family, friends, and kinsmen. Gandivam snasate hastat tvakchaiva paridahiyate. Gita 130. He says, my Lord, my bow, Gandiv, slips from my hands. My body is burning. My mind is reeling with confusion. I am unable to even stand steady. Having spoken these words, a grieving Arjuna cast away his bow and arrow and sat on the back seat of the chariot. When Lord Krishna asked him to clarify the cause of his confusion, he replied, my Lord, all my kinsmen, elders, and teachers are standing before me on the battlefield, prepared to give up their lives, but I do not see how any good can come out of killing my own kinsmen, elders, and teachers. I have no desire for a kingdom, wealth, or indeed life itself, if all those whom I may desire them for are killed in the battlefield. I would be killing my own family and friends, making women widows and children orphans. No. My conscience does not allow me to do this. I would prefer to be killed than fight this battle. But in the second chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the same Arjuna is telling Lord Krishna, Karpanya dosho pahata swabhavaha Prichami tvam dharma sammudha chetah yache yasyan nishchitam bruhi tanme shishyaste ham shadhimam tvam prapannam. Gita 2:7. My Lord, guide me, for I am unable to decide on the right course of action due to the extreme bewilderment of my mind. I seek your guidance as your fully surrendered disciple. Shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prapannam. Arjuna uses a very important word here, and that word is prapannam. You see, there are two terms, pan and prapann. Pan means mere external surrender, as when we lay our body down before the image of God and say to him, Tvameva mata cha pita tvameva bandhuscha sakha tvameva vidya dravinam tvameva sarvam mama deva deva. Note the word ave, meaning only, is being used all through the verse. You are my only mother, my only father, my only brother, my only friend, my only wealth. You are my one and only. But what do we believe in our heart of hearts? Although God is my only mother, yet I have a mother at home as well. Although God is my only wealth, yet I have a bank balance as well. We merely mouth these words without realizing the truth and the immense importance behind them. So you see, a person whose head bows before the image of God but whose mind remains attached to the world is called pan. In other words, externally surrendered. A fully surrendered disciple is called Prapan. So Arjuna is telling Lord Krishna that he is his fully surrendered disciple. No, Arjuna did not say, I am your cousin or I am your friend. He could have, because he was indeed Lord Krishna's first cousin, as well as his friend. But he said instead, I am your disciple. Please instruct me. Lord Krishna then told Arjuna, Arjuna, not fighting the battle will be a sinful action on your part. Arjuna was confused. How can not doing something be considered a bad action? Lord Krishna explained further. Arjuna, turning away from one's duty is a sinful action which results in the attainment of hell. It is your duty as a kshatriya or warrior to fight this rightful battle. Therefore, if you turn away from the battlefield, you are neglecting your duty and will have to suffer as a consequence. It means then, Arjuna thought, refusing to fight is a bad action leading to hell, but please tell me what the consequence of fighting the battle will be. Lord Krishna then told Arjuna, Hato va prapsyasi swargam jitva va bhokshase mahim. 237 Gita. Arjuna, if you are slain in the battle, you will go to Swargloka due to having performed your duty, as a result of having performed your duty. If, on the other hand, you emerge victorious, you will enjoy the sovereignty of the entire earth. So it's a win-win situation, since one of the two is bound to happen. Therefore, Tasmad uttishta kaunteya yuddhaya krita nishchayah. Second line of the same verse, 237, Gita. Arise, O mighty Arjuna, and resolve upon battle. But Arjuna was far-sighted. He inquired further, granted that I will surely be favored with either celestial or earthly pleasures, please tell me one more thing. Is there peace and happiness in Swarglok or heaven? Will I find what I'm looking for in Swarglok? Lord Krishna noticed that Arjuna was coming very close to the answer. So he replied, Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam chine punye martyalokam vishanti. 921 Gita. Arjuna, the pleasures of this world are only those, the pleasures of Swarglok rather, are only those of this earth, just heightened and perfected. True happiness cannot be found even in Swarglok. Arjuna thought, it means then that even Swarglok is to be avoided. And I need not ask you about the pleasures of this world, since I have experienced them all during my kingship and know for a fact that there's not even a trace of happiness on this earth. It means then that I am trapped on both sides. If I fight the battle, I am doing a good deed, as a result of which I face the bondage of either earth or Swarglok. If I refuse to fight, I am neglecting my duty, which will lead me to the bondage of hell. Seeing that I face bondage either way, tell me what I should do. What should I do that will release me from the bondage of hell, earth, as well as Swarglok or heaven? Lord Krishna answered, Arjuna, do not perform the action of fighting the battle, and do not perform the action of not fighting the battle at the same time. Fight the battle. My Lord, what kind of a riddle is this? Arjuna, the individual who succeeds in solving this riddle attains liberation from both virtuous and sinful actions. It is only the individual who reaches this stage of complete inactivity who attains supreme happiness. But how can we reach the stage of complete inactivity? Lord Krishna answers, Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Braja. 1866. By this time we have reached the 18th chapter of the Gita. Now Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, abandon all varieties of dharma or righteousness and come to me alone for shelter. Arjuna interrupted. He said, my Lord, I have already accepted you as my one and only refuge. I have already acknowledged the fact that you are my one and only, that I am your fully surrendered disciple. Yes, indeed, you did say this, Arjuna, but at that time, in the first chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, you were also taking shelter in righteousness. You were afraid of violating your moral and ethical duties. What I'm asking you to do is not to take shelter in worldly duties, but in me instead. But if I renounce my worldly duties, will it not be a sin on my part? Questioned Arjuna. Lord Krishna reassured him. Arjuna, do not worry, for I shall release thee from all bonds. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshishyami ma shujah. 1866. I will release you from all past sins. Now, all we need to understand is that both good and bad actions are a cause of bondage for the soul. Therefore, both are dangerous. Renunciation of both these actions means surrender. Surrender is another name for complete inactivity. Surrender is another name for doing nothing. For example, what does it mean when the armed forces of a nation surrender to the enemy forces? It means that they stop doing. And what do we mean when we say that a businessman has declared bankruptcy? It means that he has surrendered to the government. He has stopped doing and therefore is freed from all financial responsibility. So we see that surrender is another name for complete inactivity. This stage of inactivity is a stage we must reach in order to attain God's grace. In other words, the grace of God is based on the condition of complete inactivity. Now, we cannot accuse God of falsely advertising himself as the all-merciful Father. Why? Because we have now understood that all we have to do in order to attain God's grace is to do nothing. And doing nothing cannot be called a condition. So you see, God is very clever. So we understand that God will bestow his grace on us when we stop doing everything. This is his divine law. We see the same happening in the world as well. A newborn child does not do anything for itself. The mother assumes its full responsibility. However, as the child starts to grow and starts doing things for himself, the mother starts lessening her responsibility in the same proportion. Eventually, the child, now an adult, does everything by himself. He feeds himself, bathes himself, goes to school on his own, and returns home by himself. He comes and goes as he pleases. But note, when he was only 6 years old, and when he was only 5 minutes late in returning home from school, both his parents had panicked and had gone off to look for him. So the point is that as long as we remain the doers, as long as we think ourselves to be the doers, God does. But only the work of noting down our thoughts and ideas and punishing or rewarding us accordingly. In other words, he acts as a judge until then. But as soon as we start surrendering to him, he also starts showering his grace in direct proportion to our surrender. And the moment our surrender is complete, the moment we reach the stage of complete inactivity, he immediately assumes our full responsibility. Tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. 922 Gita. Our surrender, however, must be complete. God will not bestow His grace on us unless we stop doing everything. The Taittiriya Upanishad also states, Yada hye vaisha etasmin nudarmantaram kurute athatasya bhayam bhavati. 2:7. If there remains the slightest lack equal to a hair's breadth in your surrender, you will not attain the grace of God. In the words of Yogi Sri Krishna Prem, the divine grace intervenes only when you are at the end of your tether, after all your mighty efforts. For then, feeling lost as you call out to Him with every fiber of your being to save you from your shipwreck, His love answers. And your heart is flooded with love, His light knelling the doom of centuries of darkness. Draupadi, as you may know, was the wife of the 5 Pandavas. Once, these 5 brothers gambled with their 100 cousins, the Kauravas, and put their wife on stake after having lost everything in the gamble. In a final bid to win everything back, the Pandavas lost even Draupadi to the Kauravas. And in order to inflict the ultimate humiliation on them, one of the Kauravas, Dushasan, began to disrobe Draupadi in front of all her husbands and all those present in the court. But Draupadi was certain that her brave husbands would protect her honor. But to her disappointment, they all hung their heads down in shame, because they no longer had the right to offer her protection. She then looked to her elders, such as Bhishma, Dronacharya, Kripacharya, and Dhritarashtra, for help. But they also had no right to offer her protection. Draupadi realized that she was all alone. So she thought to herself, the saints speak the truth when they say that everyone in the world is selfish. So we see that Draupadi is becoming surrendered, slowly but surely. Her surrender was not yet complete, for she decided to protect herself by clenching the edge of her sari between her teeth. But her strength proved no match to that of Dushasan, who is said to have possessed the power, the strength of 60,000 elephants. He tugged once, and the sari was out of Draupadi's teeth. Now Draupadi was completely helpless. And yet she remembered that there was still one other personality who could help her. Who was that? Lord Krishna. So she cried out to him, Ha Nath Dwarika Vasin. This was a moment of complete surrender. The Lord was waiting for Draupadi to surrender completely to him. As soon as she did, he appeared before her and protected her by extending the edge of her sari endlessly. Now try as he did, Dushasan could not disrobe Draupadi. And he finally gave up out of sheer exhaustion. So we see that as long as Draupadi looked to others for protection, as long as she had faith in others, she failed to submit completely to Lord Krishna. Hence, she did not receive his protection. But the moment she surrendered completely to him, the moment she abandoned all hope in others and in herself, the Lord came to her rescue immediately. We also have to reach a stage of complete surrender. It depends on us whether we reach it in a day, a month, a year, or several lifetimes. So you understand that in the spiritual realm, we attain everything by not doing anything. God is so merciful that He does not demand anything in return from us for His unlimited grace. He just tells us to be silent. Why? So that He can do all the talking for us. There's effort involved in talking, but what effort is there in remaining silent? Let me give you another example. Suppose the government issues a memo to all its employees and tells them not to come to work for a week, and that employees found working would lose half of their salary, whereas those absent will receive double their pay. Obviously, no sane employee would dream of going to work that week. This is, of course, a fictional situation in the material world, but quite a genuine one in the spiritual realm. You see, it is the law of the divine government that as soon as we renounce all activity, we will attain everything. But until we reach the stage of complete inactivity, it is natural that we will continue to perform either good or bad actions. And as I have already mentioned, both these actions are binding for the soul. Avashyameva bhoktavyam kritam karma shubha shubham. Mahabharata. We have to bear the consequences of both our good as well as our bad actions. Now it must be clear to you that surrendering to God does not demand any effort on our part. Therefore, we should not harbor the misunderstanding that God requires us to do something in order to bestow His grace. His unlimited grace does not carry a price tag on it. Just think about it. He offers us freedom from Maya forever without us having to do anything in return. What grace could be greater than this? The scriptures give us the example. A bird is followed by other birds while flying, as long as it carries a piece of flesh in its beak. But as soon as it lets go of the flesh, it is no longer followed. In exactly the same way, as soon as the individual soul, the individual soul does not seek shelter in the lotus feet of the Lord, he is subject to grief, anger, fear, greed, lust, and other diseases of the mind, stemming from attachment to family, friends, wealth, property, etc. But as soon as we surrender to Him, Chipram bhavati dharmatma shashvachantim nigacchati. Gita 9:31. We immediately attain our eternal goal of supreme happiness, because it is His claim, God's claim, that He will shower innumerable gifts on the individual who makes a complete self-surrender to Him. What gifts is God talking about? Yadurlabham yadaprapyam manaso yanna gocharam tadapyaprarthito dhyato dadati madhusudanaha. Garuda Puran. That which is difficult to obtain, that which is impossible to attain, and that which cannot even be thought of by the mind is given by Lord Krishna without asking to those who are devoted to Him. The Mundaka Upanishad also says, the moment an individual soul attains God, he attains unlimited knowledge. He is free of all doubts. Furthermore, he is released from the bonds, from the effects of both virtuous as well as sinful actions immediately. The same is stated in the Bhagavad. Vidyate hridaya granthischiddyante sarva sanshayah kshiyante chasya karmani drishta eva khilatmani. 1:221 Bhagavad. God says, I at once remove the knots of doubt and ignorance from the mind of my fully surrendered devotee. Furthermore, I release him from the effects of all actions ever performed by him. From this moment onwards, he looks after his devotee in exactly the same manner as a mother looks after her newborn child. Karun sada tinke rakhwari, jimi balak rakhai mahatari. Not only that, he also releases his devotee from all past sins. But this is still not the end of his grace. Let me give you another example. We hear of criminals in the world surrendering to the law, but these criminals are certainly not forgiven for their crimes. In fact, the severity of punishment is determined by looking at their previous criminal record. But divine law is quite different. God is so merciful. He releases us from all effects. Not only that, He forgives us. He absolves us of countless past sins committed by us in the course of our innumerable past lives. Plus, He fills us with supreme happiness. So just think about the endless grace of God. In the Bhagavad, He tells us, Anubrajamyaham nityam puye yetyam ghrirena bhi. 11, 14, 16 Bhagavad. God says, I follow my surrendered devotees like a slave to be purified by the holy dust of their lotus feet. Jo tu dhave ek pag to main dhaun saat. If a devotee walks one step towards God, he runs 60 steps towards Him. He is so merciful. And yet, in spite of the innumerable gifts He showers on His devotees, He still feels as if He has not done anything for them, and in fact feels indebted to them. Now, who would not surrender to such a merciful Lord? Now that we have well understood the importance and consequence of surrendering to God, let us understand what it is that we have to surrender to Him. The word surrender is generally misinterpreted. Regarding surrender, many so-called gurus teach their so-called disciples to repeat the following words before going to sleep at night. And if they do, they will attain liberation at the end of this lifetime. Shri Krishna Sharanam Mama Ram Arpanamastu Krishna Arpanamastu. In other words, the Lord is my sole refuge. I surrender myself to Him. But keep in mind that this is mere verbal surrender. Like the case of the man who drinks every evening and begs for forgiveness every morning. Sham ko khoob si pi, subah ko toba kar li, rind ke rind rahe, haath se jannat na gayi. In other words, this way not only does he not have to give up his drinking habit, but he also does not incur any sin. And then there are people who perform morning and evening oblations while chanting, the meaning of which is something like this. If I have committed any sin through any sense organ during the night, let that sin be washed away. And when evening oblations are performed, the word night is replaced by the word day. And to symbolize the sin being washed away, a little water is taken into the right hand and thrown back from under the left armpit at the end of the chanting. But let us understand once and for all that mere physical, verbal, or ceremonial surrender will not do. Why? Because the Bible states, the kingdom of God is not in words. Alright, you may say, if surrender does not mean physical, verbal, or ceremonial surrender, then what does it mean? What is the true meaning of surrender from a practical point of view? The answer is very simple. Surrender signifies complete inactivity, and we can reach the stage of complete inactivity once we stop doing everything. So the question is, who is the performer of all our actions? Is it our hands, our feet, our mouth, or our body? No. Maneva manushyanam karanam bandhu mokshayoh. Panchadashi says, the mind alone is the performer of all our actions. It is the cause of liberation as well as the cause of bondage. Jagat Guru Shri Balaji Maharaj, the current and the fifth universal master of the sage, also writes in his scripture Bhakti Shatak, a collection of 100 philosophically devotional verses. Bandhanar moksha ka karan manahi bakhan radhe radhe yate kaaniyu bhakti karu karu man te hari dhyan radhe radhe. In other words, the mind alone is the cause of bondage as well as liberation. This is why Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, Mayeva manadhatsva may buddhim niveshaya. Gita 12:8. Arjuna, give me your mind and intellect. This is the true meaning of surrender. Now we can go back to the riddle that Lord Krishna had told Arjuna to solve. Do not perform the action of fighting the battle, and do not perform the action of not fighting the battle, and yet fight the battle. What Lord Krishna means is that Arjuna should not perform the action of fighting or abstaining from fighting the battle. In other words, he should not think himself as the doer or the non-doer. For if he does, he will have to bear the consequence of good or evil action. Now you may ask, but why did Lord Krishna tell Arjuna to fight the battle? Well, what Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna is to perform his duty of fighting the battle, but to keep his mind attached, but to have his mind attached to God or Lord Krishna at all times. You see, if he performs his duty only physically without the attachment of the mind, he will not have to suffer the consequences of his actions. If the mind, which is the performer of all our actions, is not attached to the fruits of its actions, then we will not be considered the performers or the doers, and thus we will be freed from the effects of both virtuous and evil actions. This is the point. So now you must have understood the true meaning of self-surrender. It is our mind and intellect that we must surrender to God and Guru. The next question is, why have we not surrendered to God so far? Is it possible that we have been unaware of the need to surrender to Him? No. We all have come across, we all have been in contact with countless saints or God-realized souls in the course of our innumerable past lives. Through these saints we have heard about the necessity of self-surrender, and yet we have not surrendered to Him. Why? Why is this so? Lord Krishna gives us the answer in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Namam dushkritino mudha prapadyante naradhamah mayaya prahitjnana asuram bhavamashritaah. 7:15 Gita. You see, there are four kinds of individuals who cannot surrender to God. This is what God tells us. First, there are those who are fools. They are completely unaware of their relationship with God. They take birth and live their lives, which according to them means working, getting married, having children, going for a vacation now and then, and putting some money in the bank. After leading a meaningless life, these individuals die only to be born in lower forms of life in the next birth. For example, when goats are brought to the slaughterhouse and are made to stand in line, the goat in the front is having its head chopped off, while the one in the back is busy munching on grass. It does not realize that its turn is going to come shortly. Similarly, the ignorant fool is busy collecting worldly possessions without realizing that he will have to leave it all behind one day. The second category of individual is called Naradham. These individuals are somewhat aware of their relationship with God and the importance of God in life, but they do very little or nothing towards their spiritual growth due to carelessness and laziness. And the third category of individual is the type who doubts everything and argues with everyone about God, the saints, and the scriptures. Why is such and such written in the Ramayana or the Gita or the Bhagavad? These individuals ask questions not out of curiosity but to argue and prove others wrong. They have no intention. They are completely unwilling to change their opinion about anything. The fourth and the final class of people are demonic people who have no concern with God whatsoever. These individuals even try to stop others from taking God's name. Obviously, we belong to one of these categories. It cannot be the first one because we are somewhat aware of God's place in our life. We are also not the type who argue for the sake of argument, and neither are we the type who try to stop others from going to God. The only category left is the second one. We know who God is. We know what to do, but we're just too lazy and careless to do it. What is the cause of our carelessness? You may say, it is because we're not interested in God. But you have no doubt heard the familiar saying, first deserve, then desire. We have to work at getting things in life. Then how can we expect our mind to automatically get interested in God? We will have to make an effort to get our mind interested in Him. So far, our mind has been interested in the world. It has been surrendered to the world. Now, we have to detach it from the world and attach it to God. And in order to attach our mind to God, we will have to practice devotion. What is the process we must follow in order to bring our mind to the stage where it will rise above the world and become attached to God at all times? As the Gita states, Tesham Nityabhiyuktanam. What are the basic conditions that must be fulfilled in practicing devotion to God? These practical aspects and much more will be discussed in the next discourse. Until then, Bole Vrindavan Bihari Lal Ki Jai, Srimad Satguru Sarkar Ki Jai.